Hey everybody, welcome in. We're going to get started in just a moment. All right, thank you everybody for joining us. Good afternoon. My name is Nikita Sinham with the Institute for Local Government, and so glad that you can join us today to talk about sustainability at every size, how any local government can move the needle on climate. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. That's me. I'm Nikita. I'm going to be your host for today. I'm joined on the line by Melissa Keene, my colleague at ILG, as well as our speakers. So a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to share a little bit about the organization for those of you who are not familiar with the Institute for Local Government and for our Sustainability and Beacon program. Then we're going to hear from some of our speakers today, who are Katie Bailey from the city of Rancho Cucamonga, Erica Mertens from the town of Truckee, and Ryan Lau from Alameda Contra Costa Transit District. And we'll have an opportunity towards the end after the presentations to answer some of the questions that you may have. So if any questions do come up, please drop them in the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar panel, which I'll show you in just a moment. So you should see on your screen a GoToWebinar control panel. There should be a section for questions. So throughout today's presentation, if any questions come up, please feel free to drop them in there. We'll be monitoring those and getting to them towards the end of our time together today. So for those of you not familiar, the Institute for Local Government is a nonprofit affiliate of the League of California Cities, California State Association of Counties, and California Special Districts Association. So with our affiliate partners, we serve over 2,500 local agencies across the state. And we do this in a number of ways by providing easy resources and training opportunities in a number of different focus areas, including leadership and governance, workforce and civics education, public engagement, and sustainable and resilient communities, which will be our focus today. So the focus of today is on sustainability, and one of ILG's main sustainability programs is our Beacon program. The Beacon program is a free, easy to join program that celebrates local governments that are taking voluntary actions to build more sustainable and resilient communities. So Beacon offers resources to help local agencies understand the actions that they can take, whether it's in clean energy projects, efficient transportation, land use planning, water conservation, community engagement, and so much more, which are aimed at reducing emissions, improving air quality, and saving energy. Through this framework, agencies can gain award recognition through our Beacon Awards program and be celebrated in front of a statewide audience of peers, both elected officials and staff. The Beacon program has over 170 cities, counties, and special districts across the state that we're very proud and very lucky to work with. And we're very excited to have 3 of those agencies on the line today as our speakers, 3 of our 2021 and 2022 Beacon Award winners on our panel today. So our speakers today, Katie Bailey is a management analyst with the City of Rancho Cucamonga under the City Manager's Office. Rancho Cucamonga received the 2022 Beacon Vanguard Award for proven reductions in GHG emissions, energy and natural gas usage, and for implementing sustainability best practices activities. So welcome, Katie. Erica Mertens is the DEI Program Manager with the town of Truckee. Truckee received a 2021 Leadership and Innovation Award for equitable public engagement for their climate action planning process. Welcome, Erica. And Ryan Lau is the External Affairs Representative with AC Transit. And AC Transit received a 2022 Leadership and Innovation Award for innovation in clean transportation through their zero emission bus program. So welcome, Ryan. Thank you all for joining us so much. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Katie.
Thank you. Just want to make sure you can see me and hear me. Good. All right. Well, thanks so much, Nikita, for having us, having the City of Rancho Cucamonga join this webinar today and kind of give us an opportunity to share our climate action plan and sustainability program with you and kind of what that journey's looked like. So Today, I'll give a really high-level overview of the city's experience with creating and then now starting to implement our climate action plan, also known as our CAP. Basically, what went into it, how it really supports our city's overall strategic goals, and then how we are working to more cross-functionally implement that across departments. You can go into slide 2. So first, I just wanted to share a bit of background on how our climate action plan was developed and how it really supports our broader strategic goals. So our CAP was adopted in December of 2021 as a companion document to our 2021 general plan update. So by building the CAP and the general plan simultaneously, we were able to really ensure that our climate action plan reflects and builds on the general plan vision, and the policies for reducing the impacts of climate change in our community that general plan outlines. So the CAP accomplishes this really by outlining a detailed plan of action for GHG emission reductions, grounded in our general plan's core community values of health, equity, and stewardship. So our CAP also builds on the broader climate change policies identified in the general plan, which direct the city to really align community GHG emission reductions with statewide targets and to prioritize measures that support co-benefits for the community. So really looking at economic growth, community health, natural resource management, and improve access to community spaces and amenities that support sustainability. And then finally, developing these documents simultaneously has really helped the city to implement the general plan as well. The CAP was designed to include elements of a qualified plan under state regulation, and I'll read this out for everybody, but it's CCR section 15183.5B. And basically that unlocks project level environmental review streamlining benefits for developments that are outlined or development projects that are outlined in the general plan, which really makes it easier for us to implement those projects from an environmental review perspective. And then we can go on to the next slide. And then just to kind of give a little bit of an overview of how this CAP was actually developed, the first thing we did was to conduct a community GHG emissions inventory. And that inventory was completed in partnership with a consultant. So we did have a third party coming out and validating this data. And that really assessed emissions from a number of different categories. So we looked at on-road transportation, water, solid waste, off-road transportation, building energy, and agriculture. And as you can see from the graphic on the slide, we really had two main categories that made up 90+% of our emissions, or 96% of our emissions, and that's on-road transportation and building energy. So a lot of the efforts that we put into the CAP, we still identify reduction strategies for the other categories, but on-road transportation and building energy are really the areas where we as a community need to focus our reductions. And so next, the city generated emissions forecasts that really reflected two scenarios. The first one was business as usual if we didn't change anything and we just kept operating the way that we're going now. And the second kind of forecast looked at what would happen if we were business as usual while implementing any state and federal legislation that's coming down or that's currently enacted. And these forecasts really provided insights into kind of the scale of local reductions that we needed to achieve in order to support broader greenhouse gas emissions goals and reduction targets. So from that forecast, we went through and developed greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for 2030 and 2040 that are in alignment with statewide targets for 2030 and then a statewide goal for 2050. And our CAP outlines, we have an entire chapter dedicated to this, which really goes into a lot more detail than we'll be able to go through today. But in essence, we're looking at a 31% reduction below 2018 benchmarks for community GHG emissions by 2030, and then a 47% reduction in community GHG emissions by 2040 from that 2018 baseline. And like I said, our CAP goes into a lot more detail with this, so I can share a link that can go out if you're interested in reading it. But that's kind of a general overview of really the elements that are within that initial phase of the CAP development, which was looking at our emission targets, and then what we really have to focus on in terms of emission reductions. And we can go into slide 4. And that kind of leads us into more of the implementation side. So want to just touch on this briefly. We really have a fantastic CAP that outlines 13 concrete goals and strategies and measures for achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions in our community. But now we're working as an agency to really determine what needs to be accomplished and by when in order to stay on track for those targets. So ultimately, when we're talking about sustainability programs and projects that support CAP implementation, we've kind of broken things out into our key objectives, our key pillars, and then finally, we have our key initiatives. So our key objective is really geared towards our City Council's vision, which is to support and create an equitable, sustainable, and vibrant city that's rich in opportunity for all to thrive. And we're going to do that from the sustainability programs by reducing contributions to climate change and encouraging our community to join us in this future. We can't make all of these reductions as just an agency. We have to get community buy-in, and we have to have that education piece. And then going into our 3 pillars, so we've kind of broken things up into 3 different groups and 3 different work streams. So our first one is mobility, and that's really focusing on improving access to alternative transportation and supporting the conversion of zero-emission vehicles and fleet conversion for our city, and then also supporting infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles. The second piece is development, which is really looking at prioritizing energy efficient and carbon-free buildings, and then expanding access to green space. And we're primarily doing this through our urban forest system. So we're in the process developing an urban forestry management plan that will support both general plan goals and climate action plan goals. And then finally, resources. So it's really looking at how can we best support the efficient use and management of our natural resources, like food and water, and then waste management as well falls under that. And then finally, underneath that, we have kind of 8 different categories that we have outlined in the climate action plan, and our 13 goals sit underneath those categories. And we call these our key pillars. So these are really the dedicated work streams that we're looking at for climate action plan implementation. So utilizing kind of this general format of key pillars and then key initiatives, we've created a 5-year kind of rolling strategic plan for sustainability that includes, like I said, kind of detailed work streams for each of those key initiatives, and then key performance indicators for those as well to make sure that we are on track for success and to hit our climate action plan targets. And this is very much an ongoing process. So we're just a little over a year and change from the adoption of our climate action plan. And this is a very cross-functional effort. This isn't something that sits in one department. Every single department within our city is responsible for knowing the CAP, for understanding the CAP, and then my team, we support those initiatives and make sure that we're on track and try to identify areas where we can help and support and jump in to really ensure that as an agency and as a city overall, we are really putting climate first, and that we're making sure that we're on track and we're making progress towards these targets. So we've got a very long way to go, but we're really excited about the future and excited about the plan that we have and the strategies that we've put into place to implement.
Thank you so much, Katie. I just want to remind everybody on the line, these slides and the recording will be made available after today's webinar. And if you do have any questions for Katie, feel free to drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them towards the end of our time. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Erica.
Thanks so much, and thanks for sharing that, Katie. My name is Erica Mertens. I am our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager for the town of Truckee. And Truckee, we're a small town in the Sierra Nevadas, close to Lake Tahoe. We've got a population of about 16,000 people. Next slide. Quick overview. I'm going to touch on a little bit of a different slant. We also recently adopted a cap as part of our general plan update, which is still in process. But similar to Katie, went through that process of identifying our CAP strategies. So I'm going to talk about our community engagement, our focus on equitable engagement in particular, and how that has impacted our programs today. And I just wanted to recognize briefly the staff who were involved. I was sort of a supporting role in our Climate Ready Truckee process, but the staff and consultants who really take the lead are actually all in other places now. And if you want to continue. But this process took place really during the 2019 year, so a couple of years ago now, were removed, but we really had a series of stakeholder workshops, kind of broader community engagement, community workshops and surveys as part of that process. So the first thing that we did was identify a technical advisory committee, and then from that, we all invited different partners that represented 31 different agencies. In the town of Truckee, we have many special districts, so we really wanted to make sure that we had our broad stakeholders engaged throughout that process. So we had different sectors represented from our entire community, and made sure to also highlight and invite in groups like our Washoe tribe, which is the indigenous local tribe who lived here as our initial stewards of the land, and also made sure to identify the vulnerable populations, making sure that we had representation there as well. So for the broad outreach, our consultants helped create a video, which was kind of dispersed on social media, explaining the different, the climate primer, as well as the different vulnerabilities in Truckee. We had many different interactive engagement opportunities at community tabling events, and then just broadly utilize social media to kind of spread the messaging. And we also paired this workshop with an ongoing other sustainability effort, which was happening at that time, which also feels very timely because that was our single-use reduction efforts, which took a pause during COVID and are just now moving forward. Yeah, so we had named this process Climate Ready Truckee. That was our vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And really just tried to tie into what would drive people to engage in the process, and what kind of emotionally touches to our residents, not just necessarily talking about the environment, but the real impacts that it would have on people. Here in Truckee, the lower amount of snowfall is one of the larger issues, although it feels ironic because we just had snow today in our second snowiest winter on record. But you can go to the next slide. So with our community workshop, first I already touched on the stakeholder workshop. The community workshop was a more traditional public workshop, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that we did differently. Really did a lot of trial and error to try to encourage increased engagement. One of the things that we did was really changing the venue and the atmosphere of the workshop. So we moved outside of our traditional town hall kind of workshop or a council meeting, but held this at the Community Rec Center, which is a more neutral space. Our police department is also located in Town Hall, so wanting to be sensitive to that, we held the workshop at the rec center. We also started the meeting off with a poet. There was an inspirational speaker. There was a collaborative art project. And then the other thing that was to try to create a more kind of inviting atmosphere where people could relate no matter where they are on the spectrum of their thoughts on climate change. And then we also had childcare provided, interpreter services, because we have a 30% Hispanic Latinx population. So really making sure that all of our materials were accessible in Spanish, and also food, important. And next slide, thanks. Through the process, we really wanted to make sure that people understood that the strategies identified by the public were being heard. So these on the left, those were strategies as identified from the stakeholder group, and then also you can see kind of mirroring from the community. And in the final plan, there were notes of where things were identified, so that again, the community members could understand that their input was being heard and is reflected in the final plan. Community surveys, we utilize surveys in addition to the workshops, understanding that not everyone has the time to come to a workshop. A couple things to note, just again, making sure all of this is bilingual. I've since been doing, in my current role, a lot more community surveying, and some of the things that we're testing out right now are just providing incentives for folks to take surveys. So like a raffle, if you take the survey, being entered into a raffle for a large gift card of $250 for a Visa gift card, providing smaller gift card incentives like $5 to $10 for people, particularly for our Spanish speakers, really just kind of encourage you to do some trial and error of what might work in your community, but really just kind of changing the different ways that we gather feedback. One of the key components for us through this Climate Ready Truckee process was identifying the key allies. So we actually had hired, through our consultants, hired a subcontractor who was Spanish speaking, and as an interpreter for all of the workshops, all of the outreach through the process. Here in Truckee, we've got a really strong presence of Latina community leaders. They're called the promotores, and that was a truly integral part of our outreach. So really just finding those trusted leaders amongst your community, especially those who are in those vulnerable populations. Again, changing the venue. Instead of asking people to come to us at Town Hall, we tried to also go outside and meet people where they're at. We went to schools, apartment complexes, and did different, kind of offered different services while also gathering feedback. So just really trying to not only take information from people, but help provide to them as well. Again, that cultural framing, I kind of touched on that earlier, of understanding where people are coming from, what's important to them. Maybe for us here in Truckee, talking about climate and how the snowpack is going to be impacted, maybe wouldn't be the most like the key point that drives people to tune in, but maybe talking about how that would then impact their housing as a result of a change in our local economy, maybe that would. So just trying to frame things in a relevant fashion. Next slide. And yeah, the last thing I'll say is that as a result of this, of our Climate Ready Truckee process, we actually used it as sort of an example of our equitable engagement and really, again, trial and error of testing out different communication methods and out community engagement methods. And because of that, we identified that there was a greater need. We weren't doing as much outreach for our Spanish-speaking population. And ultimately, that's how our diversity, equity, and inclusion program began. So here I am today after transitioning from the Keep Truckee Green role into the DEI program. But that's all I've got today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Erica, for that overview of the engagement programs and different strategies that agencies can take on. I'm going to just send another reminder. I see some great questions coming in the in the chat box. So if you have questions for Erica and for Katie, please drop them into the chat. And with that, I'll pass it off to Ryan.
I just realized, yeah, I'm on mute. Okay. Sorry about that. After 4 years of this, you would think I'd had the hang of it, but my name's Ryan Lau. I'm an external affairs representative at the Alameda Contra Costa County Transit District, AC Transit for short. So this webinar is called Sustainability at All Sizes. So just wanted to give you some context about our agency. So next slide. We were established in 1960. We're the largest bus-only transit system in the state of California. Our service area covers a geographic area of 364 square miles spanning 13 cities, 8 unincorporated areas in which 1.5 million people reside. So we're a pretty healthy special district. We have 640 buses with 6 facilities, including 4 operating divisions, meaning divisions where we actually operate buses out of. 1 central maintenance facility where we do all of our major sort of engine rebuilds and transmission rebuilds, all that, the big stuff. And then our general offices where I work out of in downtown Oakland. Next slide. So we've been early adopters of zero emission technology. We started our zero emission program in the year 2000 and have since implemented one of the nation's most comprehensive zero emission programs. We started with fuel cell, it was a demonstration project. And then several years ago, we added battery electric to the mix. Next slide. So we currently operate 37 zero emission buses, 30 of which are hydrogen fuel cell, 7 battery electric, and 21 more battery electric on property and just waiting to get rolled into service. And part of the reason why it's 37 is we actually just retired the last of our sort of legacy fuel cell buses. And just in terms of impact, wanted to give you sort of like, why is that significant that we're operating these buses? So over the course of the existence of the program, we have eliminated 13,000 metric tons of CO2, and we've clocked in 5 million zero emission miles in that course of time. Next slide. As you can see, we have quite a few achievements, but the most notable is we've deployed 4 generations of fuel cell buses, clocking in, and this is, have this at the last slide, so I apologize, 5 million zero emission miles, exceeding what the FTA and the DOE thought was even possible. And so many of our fuel cell buses actually operated for over 24,000 hours, one of which actually operated for 35,000 hours. And just as an aside, our COO likes to kind of joke that when we initially launched our first fuel cell bus, the manufacturer only guaranteed 4,000 hours of operation. So it's sort of quite a feat to have accomplished 35,000 hours. Next slide. So I mentioned that we recently introduced battery electric buses to our fleet, which really afforded us a unique opportunity. And so because we're operating both zero emission technologies side by side on the same routes in the same service conditions, both vehicles made by the same manufacturer, actually the same model, just different propulsion systems. So it was truly sort of an apples and apples comparison. So it was a unique opportunity instead of having, comparing one fuel cell bus in one agency that's operating entirely on flat surfaces with another bus that's battery electric in the with cold winters and hilly terrain. This was really truly a sort of apples to apples comparison. So just for good measure, we also peppered in some of the more conventional technologies. And so we operated 5 different buses of each technology. So 5 diesel buses, 5 hybrid diesel electric, 5 legacy fuel cell buses, the ones that we just retired, 5 battery electric buses, and 5 contemporary fuel cell buses. So we colloquially call that the 5x5 study. And by the time we finished with the study, we actually ended up sort of evolving past just a mere comparison, and we actually kind of gave I guess a soup to nuts rundown of exactly what it takes to operate a zero emission program, and providing sort of a roadmap for other agencies that are just getting their zero emission journey off the ground. So it distilled down like operating cost, vehicle reliability, charging and fueling facility considerations, data infrastructure, workforce development, and really beyond that. Next slide. Our zero emission bus transition plan was a document that mapped out kind of our own course. So not just sort of talking about all of the things that go into a zero emission program, but exactly what we plan to do. So if you don't know, public transit agencies in the state of California are required to go to zero emission, fully zero emission by 2040. And every agency is probably going to have a slightly different roadmap to that because they all operate in different environments, different terrains, climates, etc., and have different infrastructure constraints and that sort of thing. Something to note, our board adopted Clean Corridors plan was the first plan to tie equity to zero emission deployments, which basically means that when we get new buses, we deploy them in quote unquote disadvantaged communities, which basically means communities that are historically suffered poor air quality, the health effects of poor air quality. So we're really trying to deliver those benefits of zero emission vehicles to those communities first. And we recently had an update to our transition plan in 2020. We initially were looking at 30% battery electric and 70% fuel cell buses. And after we did our 5x5 study, we actually decided to go 70% fuel cell and 30% battery electric. Next slide, please. And so, we realized as leaders in the zero emission space that it was really incumbent upon us to go beyond just merely showing other agencies how to do this, but actually paving the way. And one of the ways in which we have done that is being leaders in initiating policy, initiating legislation, so that we can really make it possible for other agencies that haven't embarked on this journey to do so. So in this last legislative session, this just past one, we championed a bill that exempts public transit agencies from paying state sales tax on the purchases of any zero-emission buses. So that would really apply to any public transit agencies that are looking to make those purchases. So we think that that's a pretty tremendous benefit. And then in this legislative session, we're pushing forward a bill that would help make the path to zero emission more resilient. And what I mean by that is we are trying to make it so that grid access for public transit agencies is prioritized during public safety power shutoffs and natural disaster events. We'd basically be put in the same category as hospitals, first responders, and communication infrastructure. And the idea being that the more and more vehicles that are running off of grid electricity, being, let's say battery electric buses, those won't run if we don't have access to the grid. And that goes beyond, somebody trying to take a trip to the doctor's office or getting groceries. But in the event of a natural disaster, we really have to have the capability of being sort of frontline first responders and being able to evacuate people from really dangerous environments. Next slide. And another way that we are trying to pave the way for other agencies to get into the zero emission transportation space is by developing the workforce. So we currently have a project on the books that we're looking for funding for to upgrade our training and education center. And turning it into an advanced learning lab, which would basically use augmented reality to learn all of these propulsion systems, fuel cells, battery systems, all the high voltage systems in a safe manner. It would also allow, because you're using augmented reality and a different kind of technology, we can actually leverage our trainers so that we can train all across the country or the world, really, because the trainer doesn't have to be in the same room as the mechanic in order to do that training. They can learn side by side, but not physically side by side. So basically, they would have a pair of goggles, just like your typical virtual reality headset, and you would look down at a fuel cell stack, and you would have little cues, and it would highlight certain bolts that you would have to remove in order to access some part. So something along those lines. Let's see. The other thing that I think is really important in the way in which we're approaching this workforce development is that we really see it as a career pathway, a gateway to the new green economy. And so we're reaching into our own communities, many of which are disadvantaged communities that not only have historically suffered health effects of poor air quality, but also have some socioeconomic challenges as well. So we want to really be able to sort of uplift our communities by being able to reach in and train those people in 21st century jobs. And so I do think that we have done a lot in our leadership position to pave the way for other agencies to sort of follow in our path. And I am happy to answer any questions about anything that I've said today.
Thank you so much, Ryan. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and invite Katie and Erica back as well. We've gotten some great questions in the Q&A, so we'll go ahead and get started. So all of you talked about the different partnerships that you developed and leveraged in order to make progress on your respective programs. So one question is, how did you approach that partnership development? And maybe we can start, Katie, you mentioned specifically working across the different departments in Rancho Cucamonga. Can you talk about how you approached that? Any challenges that may have come up while engaging other departments?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think more broadly, the fact that we developed the climate action plan in partnership and as a companion document to our general plan, we were really able to tap into those partnerships through the general plan. So working with regional agencies, talking with the community, a lot of the things that Erica spoke about, community engagement, we had a lot of the similar kind of pop-ups and meetings and one-on-one sessions. So we were really able to engage the community that way. And I think from an internal perspective, in developing the CAP, there was a working group that had representatives from each of the functional teams that were really going to have boots on the ground to do this work. And so as we were developing targets and initiatives and the measures that support these initiatives, they had a say in what was happening, and they were able to voice opinions about, hey, if we're going to do this, we're going to need this type of resourcing, we're going to need this type of infrastructure. So I think very early on in the development of the climate action plan internally, we were able to work cross-functionally and have representation from each of those groups because they had a seat at the table from day one. And then I think from a community perspective, very similarly, we had a very robust community engagement process that incorporated the community engagement efforts that we had through the general plan update. So we really got to hear both from our residents, from our business owners, from regional agencies, what they needed, what they could do to support, and then what their goals are as well in terms of climate adaptation mitigation. And I think back to your question, about internally, how have we kind of navigated if we've had any conflict, things like that. I really think it's going back to how does this impact our city's vision and our city council's vision for the direction of our future. And we really try to focus on tying it back to that, tying it back to how does the climate action plan support the vision for our future that we've set up through the general plan update and through other planning documents. And I think most of the folks, if there ever is, we really don't get a ton of pushback. It's usually, hey, we'd love to do this. We need resourcing to be able to do that. And that's where, we try to support those efforts. But we really just kind of tie it back to what are we doing as a city and how is it helping us move forward?
Thank you so much for that. Erica, you specifically mentioned kind of working with the community and going back and forth to understand community priorities in order to make some of those develop some of those engagement strategies that are relevant to your community. We have a question in the chat. Can you talk about strategies or messaging that you can share for conducting climate resiliency planning in communities where there might be resistance to the concept of climate change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say, fortunately, that's not the experience that we had here in Truckee. Our community really embraces it and also kind of prides itself on being a leader in sustainability. But I know certainly for a lot of rural and smaller jurisdictions that can be more challenging. I think I would just try to focus on, again, like what is really going to be the driving priorities for your community, and that might be a little different everywhere, but for us it really is like housing, maybe economic factors. So if you can find ways to kind of reframe without it, where you can tie it back into the climate factors, but maybe frame it in a way that will be meaningful to your community without, like, Climate Ready Truckee would probably not be the right name in a place that wouldn't, that's going to meet that with resistance. So yeah, just kind of maybe getting a little more creative in how you frame that messaging.
Great, thank you. And we heard from Ryan about some of the ways that AC Transit took strides that were not considered feasible or reachable, and AC Transit has shown some of those advances in the field. So we have a question, Ryan, what was the impetus for AC Transit adopting some of that zero emission technology when other districts did not?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So at the time, the California Air Resources Board, which is the government entity that regulates mobile source emissions, had a rule on the books that basically required public transit agencies to make a decision, either go with sort of a alternative fuel like compressed natural gas or liquid natural gas, or go and do a demonstration project and really, to some extent, take a risk. I know that you typically don't think of risk taking and public transit being in the same sentence, but I think the leadership at the time had the vision and the forethought to look beyond what was immediately in front of them and think about the future and what the future held in terms of transportation and that sort of thing. As Katie kind of alluded to, transportation is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases, as we know now. Maybe that wasn't as clear before, but yeah, they took a chance on zero emission technology and it seemed to pay off. So.
Thank you. So you mentioned leadership, and that's a great segue. So all three of you have kind of mentioned the leadership and the vision for your respective communities. And we know that in order to get the necessary resources that you need for implementing all of these planning projects and for carrying them out, that there is so much political will and even a champion that's necessary to lead the way and create that vision. So how have each of you approached recruiting champions or building that political will, or what role has your leadership taken? And I can start with Katie, and I would love if each of you could share a little bit.
Sure. So I think from the onset, we've really had a supported elected group. I think that they have been on board with the climate action plan. They've been on board with including climate action reference and policies in our general plan update. So we've really been very fortunate. And I think particularly where we're located in the Inland Empire, that's not always the case. So I think that we've been really fortunate to have a really supported elected group. And I think internally creating champions, externally in the community creating champions. We've been, again, just really fortunate. We have externally, we have a group called Health ERC that is run through the city. It's a city community collaborative where we work with different subcommittees and groups. It's youth leaders, it's local businesses, it's just people who are interested and engaged in our community and want to be involved in what happens with Rancho. And they've been some of our biggest advocates. We've been able to bounce ideas off of them, share plans, share proposals with them prior to launching those initiatives, and we've been able to get really direct, really good feedback. I think internally, it's just trying to find those champions. I always like to say you don't have to have sustainability in your title in order to be a sustainability champion and to be able to work in sustainability. You can just have an interest or a passion in it, and it can be related to what you're doing. Our public works team might be focusing on water efficiency and zero emission vehicle conversion. Our engineering team might be looking at how to redesign streets to make them more accessible for bikes and for walking. And it's just really trying to figure out what your kind of niche is and what your focus area is, and then trying to hone in on those champions and get them to talk about sustainability and get them to understand what their team is respectively responsible for within the CAP and how they can try to integrate that into the daily life. We don't want sustainability to be an afterthought. We want the goals and strategies and measures in the CAP to be a part of how we operate as an agency. And so I think we've been really fortunate internally and externally with getting that support.
Awesome, thank you. I'll pass it over to Erica.
Yeah, I would say similar to Katie, we're also fortunate to have a pretty supportive council base. One of the things that we did was engage the real champion, like the super green council members as the council advocate, so to speak, and had them engaged throughout the stakeholder process. So some of them were on the general plan advisory committee. Some were part of our kind of technical advisory committee for the climate action plan as well. So just really keeping them engaged in that process, I think really helped us keep that leadership buy-in as well.
Great, thank you. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Eric.
so I was going to say we differ pretty dramatically from the two other guests, just because the two other guests represent cities, we represent a special district, and so in a lot of ways we're kind of a byproduct of circumstance. And I've heard fortune thrown around a lot. We're very, very fortunate at our circumstances. So because we're a special district and we actually don't own any of the right of way that we operate on, we have to stay engaged with our elected stakeholders all the time. Also, we get all of our funding, almost all of our funding, from other sources. So we spend basically all day, every day engaging elected officials and other stakeholders, community groups, all that sort of thing, in order to just generally have enough political will to do our day-to-day function. And so because we're constantly engaged, and because we're leaders in zero emission transportation, it's easy to bring people along when you're doing cutting edge stuff. And since we're always engaged with them, it ends up being rather simple. Just I know I'm going to botch this, but it's something like you don't ever want to meet the fire chief the first time when your house is burning down. It's one of those kinds of things. Like we always want to stay engaged, and so when we have an ask, we're a known quantity. So
Thank you. Yeah, and we've heard from all of you on that process of whatever those partners, stakeholders, leaders are that you're going to work with in these projects, getting to know them early and building those relationships early on. Thank you so much, all of you, for those answers. And then sort of a related question. So how do you ensure the implementation of these plans will occur? And more specifically, how do you have funding allocated, and how are these plans funded? And what about staff capacity as well, and positions responsible for ensuring the success of these plans? I can pass it to Erica, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we are just at the impetus of beginning to implement. So we haven't actually had our general plan adopted yet. So we're not quite there yet, but we did, in anticipation of implementing the our CAP, add a new sustainability role. So we're kind of beefing up our staff, although we have like 2.5 staff working on it. So, again, that's a small town. That's probably a lot more than some other small towns. So it's all relative, but we have been kind of adding to our staff. We're also looking to hire a Civic Spark Fellow again this year, which is a very cost-effective way to augment your, not just augment your staff, but create capacity. That is the correct way of framing that, I believe. And yeah, so we're just now kind of starting to plot those dots. But Katie might have more insight on the implementation part, since you're a little bit ahead.
Yeah, we're a year ahead of you. So that's what we've been doing for the last year. That's actually, I've only been with the city for about a year, and that was a big piece of the reason why I was hired, was to help implement this plan. So from an implementation perspective, I know on my last side, sorry, there's a car alarm going off in the back here. Hopefully it's not too loud, but in the last side of my presentation kind of showed what our strategy is from implementation. So we've really created a 5-year strategic plan that's a rolling 5-year. So every year we break down what the goals are and what the targets are within our climate action plan, and then are really trying to build out what is the actual work that has to get done, and then going back with our different functional teams to identify, okay, what's going to be your responsibility? What are we working on over here? What funding and resourcing and human capacity do you need to actually be able to implement this? Erica, Civic Spark, shout out to them because we also have a Civic Spark fellow this year. And in terms of capacity building and just trying to create plans, they're a fantastic organization to work with, and it's really good skills development for folks who are early out of their careers or early out of college and just kind of getting started in their careers as well. But I think that's our biggest thing is trying to figure out, okay, what those work streams are that we want to focus on for the upcoming fiscal year, and then getting that buy-in early, talking about, you know, is this something that's going to be incorporated into plans at the start? So if we're constructing a new facility or doing a major remodel, are there elements that we can build in from the CAP into those construction plans and into those construction costs versus having to retroactively do things to, you know, facilities that aren't getting updates? You know, is there grant funding opportunities that are available? My team, we are a small but mighty team as well. We've got 1.5 people full-time on sustainability, and then all of our functional teams work on this as well. So it's a collaborative effort throughout the city, but we are defunct grant writers now. So that's a lot of what we're doing for funding is particularly right now with EV infrastructure and things like that, trying to get funding sources to be able to implement these projects, which I'm sure Erica can attest to as well. It's difficult when you're a smaller mid-sized kind of entity trying to apply for these things. So you know, trying to figure out how to leverage regional partnerships and how to you know, just engage community members and other partners in those applications to make them as strong and competitive as possible when you're going up against the larger cities.
Great, thank you so much for those answers. Just getting creative about partnering with the right people, and then also creative solutions to capacity issues through programs like Civic Spark. Thank you so much. So we're approaching the end of our time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once again. And as we wrap up, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers who, as I mentioned, each of these agencies are Beacon Award winners in the past 2 years, and we're so grateful that we get to work with them on a regular basis through the program. So I want to share some quick information about the Beacon program for those of you who might be interested. As I mentioned earlier, it's free, it's easy to join, and this is something that that we invite, if for those of you on the line who are interested, we invite you to reach out and ask questions, get involved. And for those of you who are involved in the Beacon program, just want to remind you that the Beacon Awards are open for this year's round of awards. So we have a number of Beacon Award categories. Those are for, as mentioned with Rancho Cucamonga, the proven reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, electricity saving, natural gas savings, and sustainability best practices. And then we also invite, for those of you who are not part of the Beacon program just yet, you're still invited to apply for a Beacon Leadership and Innovation Award, which celebrates those projects that your agencies are already implementing across several different categories that are taking strides forward to create a more sustainable and resilient community for the community that you do serve. Just in terms of dates for special districts, these award applications are open until May 1st. For cities and counties, they're open until July 7th. And then after that, we'll be in touch on the award recognition and helping you celebrate the work that your agency is doing. If you're not already part of the ILG network, please stay in touch. We'd love to hear from all the local agencies across the state and get to work with all of you. So here's some contact information for us. And then again, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our speakers. It was really wonderful to hear from each agency, different types of agencies and different sizes, different locations in the state. But there's so much amazing work being done. And so very much appreciate each of you for your time and all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. And as mentioned, the recording and the slides will all be shared out afterwards. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.